Hello and welcome to Build It Better, a show about architectural and design decisions from the top down. I'm your host, Jesse Tomchak with Disdot. Today, I'm super excited. We've got a power duo from Netlify. We've got Jason Lengstorf and Zach Leatherman. How are you guys?
Doing okay.
Awesome. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm so excited to have you guys on. I follow both your work super closely. I had to put myself through Stargaze this morning. Last week, Jason, I went through your 38 minutes to payments and moved it over to Redwood. I used everything you had and just used it in Redwood using Netlify, and man, such a time saver, and your ability to share and distill that information is fantastic. And 11D is just all over the place with static generation at a new level, right? There was Jekyll, and then I feel like 11D really pushed boundaries again to a new place, Zach. So I'm super jazzed to have you on here as well. For the Build It Better show, what we like to do is sort of take a general topic, a situation that we might have experienced ourselves in, or something where we work for. And as developers, we may not be in on the decisions, right? We may not be in the initial sort of architecture or the initial sort of scaffolding. We come into projects later, or they're sort of already up and running, or as a regular developer, we just aren't there. We're busy, fixing bugs and doing other things, so we may not be invited or privy to those conversations. So the goal of this conversation is to really let everybody in on the secret sauce that's not so secret, right? We're just regular beards doing regular work. That we sort of come up with these ideas, and they're not real great at the beginning, right? And they sort of iterate and evolve into what comes out of it. So the scenario I want to present to you guys with is we work for a company and we're rebranding, right? We got a huge bunch of money, cash inflow. Maybe it's bacon and beards, whatever the company may be. But we've got a greenfield project. We need a new marketing site, new content, new creation. But there's some stipulations. So everybody in the company must be able to contribute, but there must be an approval process to publish content out and get it through, right? So the director of marketing wants the last final look and stamp, right? That sort of last level of copyright, all those little things that businesses go through. We want developer experience to be top notch, but we also, most importantly, want people in the business to do what they do best: marketing, copy, images. We don't want them to have to come to us for service. That we want them to be sort of self-served. Things they need, they want to be able to upload or change an image or highlight or spot or change stuff on the page and see it. If they want to present to other ideas, they don't need local hosts from our machine to do so, right? They should be able to make some changes and then just either email that link out or show it in a conference presentation or any of those things. So sort of remove us from the equation of local hosts. And that, for so many times when we present, we're sitting in a room, okay, we're gonna have the developer local host and demo this key feature that's only running on their machine, right? Right out of the gate, we want that to go away. So it's sort of mold that together. We can use Sanity, 11D, Netlify functions. We want some webhooks for notifications. When is there new content? We want to be pinged. The art director is hey, just email me when there's new stuff to approve. I'm not going to check it every day. That, those sorts of requirements. So where do you guys start? So blank sheet of paper, it's almost it's almost paralyzing. Where do you start?
Zach, you wanna kick us off?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because we went through a very similar project at Netlify last year, right after I started the company. We did a major rebrand. And one of the first things that we had to decide, because we wanted results quick. So we didn't want to do a sort of soup to nuts. We didn't want to have a full solution to deliver results to our stakeholders. So we wanted, first and foremost, we had to pick what sort of framework we wanted to build the website in. So before we would sort of democratize the content creation, we wanted to be able to deliver results in the form of actual websites that we can deploy online, viewable by our higher level stakeholders, so that we can make our money and be happy, well-adjusted, paid adults.
Well, the well-adjusted part is maybe, iffy.
Yeah, it comes and goes.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think, you know, one of the first things that comes to mind for me whenever we start talking about a major redesign is, you know, we want everybody to be able to contribute, but that's not like what contribute means is an important distinction, because, you know, writing a blog post or a press release is a different level of contribution from changing homepage copy. And it's tempting as developers. We want to try to automate everything and reduce friction. But in certain cases, we actually want to increase friction because we want the right kind of friction to make sure, you know, as you said, somebody needs to be the final approver, right? And
Yep.
so when we start talking about those sorts of things, I would usually start by breaking down what are the workflows and the outcomes that we want for each of those workflows. So, you know, for a site like this, a marketing site, we're probably going to have a blog and press releases. So that's a pretty standard workflow. We want anybody in the company to be able to go in, create a draft, and then that draft goes into an approval queue. We want that draft to show up on a deploy preview so that they can share it around for edits and feedback. And then we want like homepage copy that I kind of, you know, I don't necessarily want anybody in the company to just start shooting around drafts of like, I changed the whole homepage, you know, it can create a lot of churn, right? So that maybe is something that's a little more tightly controlled, where you're going to have a bit more of a process. You're going to open a pull request or something like that. But it all definitely depends on kind of what size of company is it, you know, because at 10 people, it doesn't make sense to put those gates in place. At 200 people, it definitely does. And you know, when you get to 2,000 people, then it's like now you you can't democratize anything anymore. It's, you know, everything goes through gates.
Yeah. For something like that, could rather than a pull request for like homepage copy, could we do something like roles? Would there be a way to like with a CMS and like something like Sanity site pages and a rebuild, create like a role that would allow like the general users to create a draft, but like a role for homepage or marketing page content blocks?
Yeah, that's going to change based on the CMS. Like, you know, looking at what Sanity is capable of, for example, Sanity has like read write and read permissions. I don't know if they have like per content type permissions, but WordPress does. So if we wanted to do, you know, WordPress as a headless CMS, it could be a great fit for this, because we could say you know, people on the marketing team are able to access this and this. Other CMSs in the space that I think do this are, I believe Prismic has a role type that'll let you do different content types. Contentful definitely does. And so, you know, if that's the sort of road we want to go down, then you know, now I'm going to start looking at that, like what CMSs do support the type of access control we need. And if we're going to do that kind of access control, do we need to reach outside of the CMS for that? For example, like, am I ever going to need to know on the front end of the website whether or not somebody has access? Because if the access control is just for writing, probably not. If the access control is for reading, now I do, because I need to know who has permission to view a press release before it goes out in case that leaks. So those are other considerations too, is kind of what level of control do you want? What level of integration do you want, so that you can start really weighing those decisions against each other and trying to figure out, like, you know, how much machine are we really trying to build here? I'm always a fan of the least amount of machine. So I'm a really big fan of like, let's stand up Sanity, let's throw 11D on it, and there are very few moving parts here. And that, you know, that makes me really happy as a developer, and just as kind of like as a business strategy of, I don't want to spend a lot of time on internal administration. I would rather just, you know, we've got good people. Let's let those people be good and not worry about adding a bunch of checks and balances and bureaucracy to that. But obviously, that's not always feasible, and especially as companies get really large, that's not feasible anymore. But you know, I would start there. I would kind of start with like, what's the minimum amount of control that we really need to put in place here to let people get their jobs done.
Okay, I really like that idea. Like we we go from let's get something, where Zach is like, let's get something up for stakeholders right away, and let's start simple, and then we quickly devolve into like this fine-grained roles, right? We go into these sort of rabbit holes, as I've often heard them called, and you're like, whoa, maybe this is too much. So let's step back and like, let's deploy 11D with Sanity. Let's get a sort of staging and a production up and running. Is that just with Zach walk me through with 11D for now? We want to be able to stand it up and get all the developers on board and churning out tickets as fast as possible, right? Do we just do NPX 11D new blog fancy pants? Well, like
that's
I mean, what we did for
that's exactly what I was going to call it, as fancy pants.
Fancy pants, the fancy pants starter project. Yep, it's available on NPM and GitHub today. No, I mean, the thing that keeps going through my mind is that when we worked on the Netlify.com redesign last year, it was one of the core things that we wanted to integrate was this idea of component-based development. So 11D doesn't really support that out of the box. So we sort of developed this view-based plugin for 11D that would allow us to develop in Vue components, and it would build the site for from those Vue components into like a static HTML representation of it. So that really, I feel like, helped our development maintenance and speed of delivery on the site. So, I mean, it depends on the size of the site, but Netlify.com sort of is big enough that we wanted a more reusable component-based development strategy. So we went with Vue in that regard. So
yeah, and this is something that our company goes through every 5 or 6 years. So having something that's sort of componentized, how does that work with? Maybe you can give me a sort of broad structure of how these Vue components work with static generation. So if I add some content and it kicks off a build, what does 11D? What's this process? Can you frame that for me?
Yeah, so I mean, I think maybe the easiest thing is to just describe what 11D does in its basest form, and that is just to take specific files with specific file extensions and use those extensions to convert that to HTML output. So in 11D, in the Netlify repo, Netlify.com repo, you can have a .vue file, and that's your single file component, and 11D will transform that using Vue's rollup plugin to HTML, and it will build all the components that you have. And different templating languages. 11D has a bunch of different templating languages we support, so Vue just plugged into that same sort of mindset. So if you've used 11D with Nunjux or liquid templating or just Markdown paired with any of those, it's the same idea, just with Vue template syntax instead of a more page-based one.
So that the idea of my Vue component would fetch the content from Sanity, render it, and then the render output of that component is saved down through this sort of process in 11D.
Yeah, I'm worried to like talk about how many different features of 11D we can put in here, but 11D has this idea of a data cascade. So it fetches all of your data asynchronously, and then it builds your site from that sort of data model. So we can fetch all of our data using this data cascade, using global data files or data files specific to a specific template. And so you can sort of decouple your data from the Vue components altogether, which is, I think, kind of nice. So we can do all our Sanity fetching separately, and then build the site using that data model that we can fetch separately.
Okay, so like from that global data object, we can really lean into 11D and use as many features as we'd like to sort of get this project across the line, right, and make it a really good experience.
Well, I think. Sorry, one thing I want to jump in and say here is what Zach's talking about is actually kind of a central tenet of web design that I think is really important, because we're moving toward what usually gets balled up generically as the Jamstack, but effectively what we're doing here is we're making it so that our UI is completely decoupled from the backend. So it's kind of a layer that sits on top of any backend services, and then we're pre-compiling as much of it as we can. So our intention here is, and this unlocks a whole lot of things that I'll talk about in just a second, but by doing this, what we're able to do is, as Zach said, we query all the data ahead of time during the build. So this doesn't happen when somebody loads the site. This happens when we build the site. So instead of work happening once for every user, we're doing it once for every iteration of the site. And that means we're doing a lot less work. There's a lot less room for things to break, a lot fewer moving parts. And then anything that we need to do asynchronously is done either through client-side JavaScript or through a call to a server-side or a serverless function or some API from the client-side JavaScript. The reason that this is really powerful is that, one of the first things that you said is we want to get this into developers' hands, not on their local machines as fast as possible. And so by taking this kind of pre-compiled approach, now we don't need everybody to stand up a Docker container or to get a special dev environment set up on our cloud account. We can all just clone this thing locally. And then if we open up a pull request, like if we're using Netlify, we open up a pull request against our main branch, and Netlify will automatically build and deploy a deploy version of this. And so now if we've got, fancypants.netlify.app is the core, or fancypants.com. And then when we open up that deploy preview, I get a URL that's like deploy preview one fancypants.netlify.app. And now I'm able to like send that to everybody on my team to say, hey, I changed everything blue. What do you think? There's a whole bunch of other benefits, like our hosting cost is now 0 because we can run that on Netlify. Our sanity cost is now 0 because we're only doing one request against Sanity's API for every build, which is, we could do that 100 times a day and we're still not going to beat Sanity's rate limits or request limits. So now we can scale up enormously before we ever have to break into anything paid. And this is a benefit of Netlify, right? Like other platforms that are offering this kind of hosting, they charge if you run a business, but like Netlify doesn't care. We care about your build minutes and your bandwidth. And as long as you're like under those limits, we don't care if you're using it for business or charity or personal projects. So you can basically run your business for free until you have enough traffic and are making enough money that you won't even notice that you're paying for your hosting anymore. Which I think is that's a huge benefit when we're trying to get something off the ground and when we want something to be fast and shareable and easy for developers to get up and running with. Like all of those things add up. And if we don't have those, if we do need servers and databases and things to be running, it just starts to add complexity to the dev environment. It adds complexity to the deployment environment. Like our ops pipeline is suddenly, now we need release engineering instead. Like there's so many things that come in when you add in that extra layer of like, we need things to have dynamic capabilities. We're syncing node environments when we probably wouldn't need to do that otherwise. Like so many things that happen that are just like a pain that go away if you start to adopt this model, because again, you're basically saying like, if it works on my machine and it builds on my machine, it's going to build anywhere and it'll deploy anywhere, and we don't have to spend we don't have to spend anything to get it up and running.
And I think the really great thing about that is that the less you do at runtime, the faster your site's going to be too for end users. So like we don't necessarily need to do any data fetching at runtime. Like the client is so light that you can really, really deliver fast sites using this model too, which I love.
Yeah, and especially for like use cases like this, I think are a fantastic way to sort of exemplify that sort of fast. Like most of this content is going to be mobile based, whether it's reshared through marketing on Facebook or Twitter or web blog posts or RSS feeds, or like it's such a light touch. So like 90+% of this content is mobile consumption on tablets and things like that. Like most people don't boot up their computer to read the news anymore. And so when we're talking about this use case, and I think it trickles out to so many more other use cases, this idea of less DevOps, right? We've all been in that scenario of like, well, I'd like to release, but it's going to take me 2 days to sort of like realign the stars of Jupiter. It's like landing the Mars rover every day. Every Friday, I want to release a new build. So we take this idea and we stand up Sanity and 11D. Now we've got fancypants.netlify.app, and it's up and running. The stakeholders are really happy with it. And now the idea is how do we get people to contribute content? Is there a workflow or a mechanism in this process where we can we don't need gates right now, but maybe just a real simple sort of approval process?
Yeah, so I think the challenge with Sanity is that well, actually, no, I have an idea. So Sanity doesn't have the idea of draft only permissions, as far as I know, unless they've added it recently.
Nope.
So anybody in the company is going to be able to create a draft. And so the way that we would typically handle this is we would want, whenever you publish on Sanity, that would kick off a new build, and that would cause the site to go live again, right? We set up a webhook for that and all those things. But if that's not what we want, and we want somebody to approve it, then what we can do instead is we can have the webhook kick off a staging branch or a content branch build. And so now somebody has a content branch, and then when they're happy with the content, they push the button to rebuild the main branch against that new content. I can see some trickiness with that already, because if I put up a branch or I put up content and then a developer pushed to production, it would grab new content whenever that happened. So there are definitely limitations to this approach. And like, if that approval process is critical, it would honestly probably keep me from using Sanity, just because of the current approval flow that isn't there. And I'd be looking at something like Contentful that's got a more fine-grained, like, access publishing control workflow.
And that's good. And that's sort of, we've run into one of these sticking points right out of the gate. We haven't even left the room. So let's pivot to maybe Contentful and talk about, that fine grain access and the idea of do you know enough about Contentful? Do they have roles sort of baked in at that point? I haven't used Contentful in a couple of years.
Yeah, so Contentful access control, I'm pretty sure is like down to the, let's see, where do they have it? They let you do custom roles and permissions. So I'm pretty sure for each one of these, you can set up like what type of content people have access to, and then you get to control. They've got a whole list here: read, edit, create, delete, archive, unarchive, publish, unpublish, different actions you can restrict. And so you would be able to basically say, like, this type of user, a author or a whatever, has write but not publish. And then editors have write and publish. And administrators have write, publish, and delete, or something like that. And so then you have this ability where you can kind of ratchet up what somebody's access is and make sure that, destructive actions are very tightly gated. And maybe publish is more wide, like any manager can publish, and any team member can write. And that way, and you can even open that up further and let people outside the company who, like partners, would be able to write as well, and it just goes into a publish queue
and sort of contribute. Great. I think that's great. How does Zach, does that change our, we've set it up with Sanity. Let's say we're a couple days in, we're going through the thing, we're like, this is great, and we hit this sort of stumbling block. How do we pivot quickly to a different data source? Do I have to run npx fancy pants new project again and create a new repo, or is there? I'm sure there's a better way. Walk me through this.
Yeah, I mean, as long as your data is decoupled from your components and your templates, I mean, the really only thing you'd need to change is your queries that point to Sanity, and you'd have to modify those to point to the new Contentful instance using, I assume, whatever. I haven't used Contentful, but whatever query language they use. Yeah, I have some experience with Sanity, but yeah, it's all decoupled, so you should be able to just migrate those data sources over.
All right, so we're already starting to see the benefits of this sort of like decoupled front API stack and backend, right? We sort of worked ourselves into a corner with the CMS selection, and oftentimes we would be, months into, we would be stuck with this choice, right? Everything, even we're only a couple days in, but think like 2 months in, you're like, oh, now we have this weird access thing. Like, do we have to unwind all this work? But we can, because they're component type, because they're separate pieces, we can sort of plug and play. So we peel off a couple tickets and send Jason down to the basement to migrate the data to Contentful, and then set up the queries, and then slide lunch under the door, and then he gets it wired up in a separate branch. Now, is this something, Jason, where you're down in the basement? We'll let you out when you're done, but you cut a branch once you get data migrated over to, say, Contentful, and start working on the queries. Netlify's got a preview branch that you can share with the rest of us, because we're not going to let you out unless you can prove that you've done this.
Yeah. So the thing that's really cool about this approach is because what we're doing is based on pre-compiling, and because that pre-compiling typically gets triggered by Git commits, we can set up a per branch deploy. So we can have our main branch, our staging branch, our QA branch. I could pull a experimental feature branch. And we also automatically create builds whenever you open pull requests against your production branch. So there are automated ways to get different builds of different ideas. So if I have an idea, I open a pull request, I'm automatically going to get a build that I can show you. But if we had like a QA branch or a content branch, then maybe the content branch has an API key set that pulls draft content from Contentful. And now I'm able, whenever somebody updates Contentful content, because it's got that extra API key permission, it would be able to pull the unpublished content so that we can preview it in space and say, hey, this is what this new content's going to look like on the site. And with an 11D site, those are going to build in a minute or two. So it's about as fast as it would be to clear the cache. And by the time somebody gets around to checking your Slack message, most likely that site's already built and they can see that content live. So it creates a really powerful content flow. And the really nice thing about it is, like, each of these things that's happening is they're atomic. So like the builds themselves are being done. And when you're compiling, you like, what compiled means is you're getting a folder full of files. Like when you run a 11D build or a next build or a Gatsby build, the output is a folder called dist or out or public or whatever somebody calls it, that is full of actual HTML, JavaScript, and CSS and your other assets. And you can just drop that onto the internet. So when you're doing these builds, you're basically just creating a series of folders. And that means that anything we try, we can just switch between folders. And we click one button in the Netlify interface and we're like, well, let's take that one live. No, we didn't like that one. Roll back to the one before it. And then we click that button and that one's live. And they live forever. We can go back and see the very first commit to the Netlify app.netlify.com. That's a Netlify build. And we can go back to the very, very first commit of the app and go look at it because it still exists. It's an atomic deploy.
That is so simple and fantastic. It reminds me, did you guys ever have to like FTP, like output your stuff and like copy to FTP and copy over your work? Like I had, at one point, I think I had my desktop set up specifically. It had past, previous, and they were marked, and I would make copies. I had, the right click copy option drag. I would make, because I'd overwritten myself so many times and in the past that I would go through these motions of like backup, historical backup, archive backup, other backup, Thursday's backup, morning backup, afternoon backup, and then I would move my new stuff to FTP. It sounds similar to that, but it sounds far less laborious and more refined and sort of a new, easier sort of way to, and they're just files, right? They're just the underpinnings of the web where we're just serving those small bits. But it sounds way better than what I'm used to, what I remember doing in the past on those folders.
Well, I think an important thing to remember when you're talking about the internet in general, right, is that when you call any web page, what is happening is you are at a simplified level taking a template and some data, you're mashing them together, and the output is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And that doesn't matter if you're requesting PHP, if you're loading from Node, if you're using React, whatever. What ends up in the browser is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if we can compile that ahead of time so that your browser's not doing the work, then we get all this predictability and consistency. And that is where that power comes in, because, like you said, when you're doing FTP, if you didn't pull the backup and then you drag that folder on and then you use your clever FTP program to like merge the files and then one of them corrupts, you have no idea which one's broken. And so then you have to like just start the whole thing over again and hope for the best. And that's kind of what's happening when you've got these like server rendered sites where you put something up and then you clear the cache, but there's also an API cache and there's also an asset cache. And so like, that those layers of caching, like maybe one cache picks up a stale cache from the other cache, and now you've got this inconsistent level. Whereas if you've got these atomic deploys where they're a folder, you drop them in, clear one cache, and it all goes live. And so you get this like kind of peace of mind, not by getting clever, but by getting really simple about the way that you build things. You want as few moving parts as possible, because that's like the reason people say caching is hard is because typically caching is complex. But if you've got one file, one cache, that's not as hard as, because you're basically saying like, yes, I would like this file to be cached until I replace it. And you don't have to manage and also keep track of this API and also keep track of like this server rendered output that might change, but usually doesn't change, but maybe let's set a TTL so it can change sometimes. Like that's where the complexity comes in, and that's where caching validation becomes so hard.
Is that a hard problem in computer science?
Oh man, so this like awful like cache problem. It's terrible. I have this like visceral like CloudFront like cache holding problem that took us days, maybe even a week to like be like, everything we do, nothing changes. It was wonderful.
Yeah, I spent a week or so back when I was at IBM because we had some part of the cache was misconfigured and we could not get it to clear, and it kept refreshing itself with stale data, and it's like we just couldn't figure out what to do. We had to turn all the caching off for like 3 days and just ate the server bandwidth costs.
And just let it sort of like
everything
liquidate
to clear out all the way. It was horrible, we had to go do all these meetings with leadership about what we did wrong, and we didn't know, so we were kind of lying. Like we're like, I don't know, we fixed it, but we really don't know why it worked. Like, and that was it was things like that really pushed me down this architectural path. Is like, humans are not built for the level of complexity that the average web app gets deployed with. We just keeping track of that, like. A joke that I've been making that feels less and less like a joke the more I say it is if describing your web architecture to somebody requires you to pull out a whiteboard, it's too complicated.
That kind of stings. That hits some real truth. And I've built these widget machines that kick off a build and pull the APIs and hold them and pass down to another container that passes over to this other container that does this dance, and then it checks this other thing, and then it's miraculously done. But yeah, this simplistic build, I think, gets us future-proof. It gets us far. It gets us a lot more slack. We're not putting out fires. We're building product and things for people to use. What are the downs? There's got to be a catch, right? There has to be a downside to this. Fancy Pants has been around. It was my grandfather's company, and we've got archive stuff for many, many decades now of historical Fancy Pants articles and underoos. So how do we handle the pre-build of hundreds or thousands of pages and things like that? These minutes or two, are they going to expand into hours? Is that something that we need to address now, or is that just future Jason and future Zach? They'll figure that out.
There are solutions, and so the way that we're recommending people approach that right now is Netlify and really any host has support for subroute proxies. So if you've got on your site fancypants/blog/press releases/archive, etc., then you can build each of those subroutes as an independent site. So if you've got historical content that does not change, build it once. It'll take an hour or whatever, and then you put it up at archive, and then you don't have to build it again until you change the site design. But the blog, which is 100 pages or whatever, you can set up to run where it's going to build the most recent 100 posts, which is always still just a couple of minutes. Zach, you're doing this right now on the netlify.com site, right? You want to talk about like the specific approach?
Yeah, we actually, when we did our redesign last year, we had the large legacy site that was running on Hugo, and we had to migrate a few pages at a time. We didn't do it all at once. We didn't do all or nothing. So we actually used these per route migration and proxy redirects to just migrate a couple of pages at a time. Now the difficulty there is that we had to manage sort of our masthead and footer navigation between the two repos. But it really allowed us to deliver a completely new site with a completely new tech stack without sort of breaking the existing content that we had in place. So it allowed us sort of to do a very fine-grained migration, and it went pretty smooth. Yeah, I've been real happy with it. We're still trying to get a lot of those pages off the legacy stack, but yeah, it really let us deliver something quickly for our stakeholders.
That's fantastic. Can you two give me a little detail on the sort of like how a proxy, let's say I've got slash marketing slash blogs, but then I've got this chunk of like slash archives. Is it a proxy configuration? Do they have to live in a different repo? Am I in a YAML file? Can you sort of like, can you scaffold one up for me?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can have multiple projects in the same repo, but the way we did it is we had two separate repos that were on different tech stacks, and there is this underscore redirects file that Netlify works with. It's just a new line delimited file where you can put in a path and then the URL that you want it to go to, and I mean, it's pretty simple. You can even do slugs and wildcards and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, it's very, very easy to do. Once you see the syntax or the first example that we put up, yeah, it was stupid simple.
The really nice thing about it too is that you can configure this to be like one way that we've seen it done. A common example of this is like docs. The marketing site and the doc site, they're managed by different teams. They're probably on different code bases because they have different needs. So the marketing site is going to have a separate repo for marketing, and the docs team is going to have a separate repo for docs. And maybe that one's open to the public because they want community contributions and so on and so forth, right? That one's going to build with a base path of docs, and then we publish it on our .com site as /docs proxied to our site, our doc sites, whatever the hosted site is of it. So transparently, it looks like somebody's going to .com/docs, but really they're going to two different websites. And this has a lot of power because when you proxy like that, we can share authentication between these apps because they're under the same domain. So we can keep like cookie-based auth and all that kind of stuff going. Your sessions persist. But you can also do it in such a way that, like, if we had a big site, like let's say our press releases got to the, you said it's your grandfather's company. We've got 100 years of press releases here. One thing that we could do is we can set up our build command to have an archive build and then a separate build command that is like the dynamic build. And so you could do something where, we're gonna filter through these markdown files or through these blog posts, and we're gonna do a filtered query that says, for the new build, I want to build everything that is less than 100 days old. For the archive build, we're gonna build everything that is more than 100 days old. Those build to two separate sites, but then we can serve those under different routes. And you'd have to get a little bit clever if you were building like /blog in two different commands, because then you're in a position where you're doing a little bit of like merging, but you could do that through automatic proxy generation, where you would look for it in the fast build and then fall back to the archive build with a wildcard proxy. Which all of that is, again, that's a one-line config. It's we worked really hard on this in Netlify because we knew this was going to be something that was going to be required.
Yeah, this isn't something that's going to take me 3 or 4 days in like regex magic to sort of distill. It's a line that I can configure in my underscore redirect file to do this sort of automatic here, and then fall back to, if you don't find it, there's an auto fallback, sort of a default fallback.
So, yeah, and honestly, like the rule would be like /blog star, and if it finds it, 200, everything's fine. If it doesn't find it, go to archive site /blog splat. Ooh. And serve that with a 200. But on the site, it just comes up as oursite.com/blog/ archive post.
Oh, okay, nice. That just clarified it, like just instantaneously. I could see that in my head, in that underscore file as really nice, sort of like fallback sort of style. That's really, really nice.
Yeah, and it's I think it's one of those things where whenever, like, that is more complexity. You're adding two builds now, and those builds have conditions, and you have to know, like, okay, we got to run the archive build if we need to reset the styling on the site or whatever. But I guess the alternative to that is a different kind of complexity where you're like, well, we want like incremental rendering or something, and so we're going to partially build part of the site and then we're going to leave the rest of it for the server, and then that means that all of our APIs need to be up and they could get hit at any point. All of our databases need to be up and they could get hit at any point. And that means that all of our archive data, even though it maybe only gets requested, once a month, still needs to be available 24 hours a day because we don't know when that one request is coming in. And that introduces caching complexity because now we've got a build time cache and an API cache and that incremental like server rendered cache, and we've got to keep all those things in sync. So that complexity, in my opinion, the complexity of setting up 2 build commands is significantly lower than the complexity of setting up those 3 layers of caching, or the even more layers of caching if your site gets more complex than one data source, which, let's be fair, in the average website today, you have significantly more than one data source because you're pulling in from your content management system, but you're also going to pull in from your newsletter management system. You're probably going to hit something like Stripe. You're probably going to be hitting, your Shopify account to show some swag, or, there's so many things that you're going to be hitting as part of building a page that say you can wave away one API and say, oh, it's just one API, but like, okay, one API plus your Shopify plus your various analytics accounts that are injecting some script, or your various backend accounts that are injecting discount codes or media or whatever it is that's coming into the site. It just adds these like kind of snowballing complexity. Like if you've ever done factorial math, the complexity that comes in here, like one item is one possibility, 2 items is 2 possibilities, 3 is 6 possibilities, and 10 is like millions of possibilities because it just explodes in complexity as you add more factors. And so it's really like that's why I'm so bullish on this idea of like keep it simple, like don't add complexity, make like a series of simple build steps and then use the proxy to make those work, as opposed to trying to get your app to do all of these complex things together. Humans can't keep more than 3 or 4 factors in their brain before it gets too complex for them to reason about.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about complexity, the idea of having 2 separate builds has options, but the builds are also deterministic, right? They have I can run the build for archive or blogs, and I know purely what I'm going to get on the other end. If I have invalidation, if I have server APIs, and now all of a sudden I've got 9 variants, and deterministic is out the window, right? It could fall down at any point along this chain of Christmas lights that we strung up along our company.
Yeah, and how much time do we spend as developers encouraging ourselves whenever we can to avoid side effects, to write pure functions? If you use this approach to building sites, you're turning your website into a pure function. Same input, same output, guaranteed. And that, I think, that's like that kind of consistency guarantee is hard to get with complex moving systems. And that's the value here, is predictability. As you said, it makes it deterministic. And I can't overestimate the peace of mind that creates. Like, how many times do y'all, Zach, on your team, how many times do you deploy to production a day?
A lot, yeah.
You shrug as if it's something that is like actually continuously happening, because I've heard continuous deployment, and for me it's a unicorn in places that, in projects that I've been in. It's like it's continuous in the sense that like we can push it out when we want to, when someone sits down for 30 minutes and like make sure that babysits it all the way through. But like you just sort of shrugged it off, like, I don't know, it's deploying now, it's deploying while I sleep. Like, is this the sort of warm, fuzzy blanket, that's warm, comfortable feeling of confidence that we get from these deterministic builds?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, it's really not something that we worry about on our team all that much. I mean, once a deploy goes up, it either succeeds or it fails. And if it fails, the end user doesn't see it at all. So, yeah, I mean, build failures are not a problem because they're completely shielded from any of our customers.
Yeah.
So yeah, we build to production out, I don't know, 5, 10 times a day. I've done 20 times a day. Yeah, it's not that big of a deal. And I'll even do it on Friday at like 6 p.m. I don't care.
Yeah,
Let's do a deploy.
Sir.
Well, and
That
this
sounds
is the thing
amazing.
that's so cool, because you could also, like, you could say, oh, well, it's the marketing site. Like, that's not a big deal. But like our app.netlify.com, which is the core of our business, it's what we make, all of our revenue off of, and all, like, people have to have that or it doesn't work. We'll deploy that a dozen times a day. And it's because of this, like, immutable, atomic, deterministic builds. We know that if the deploy fails, Netlify knows not to deploy it, so it won't go live. And we just get a notice in our Slack that's like, hey, your build failed. You should go look at that. And we've got our testing running as part of that deployment process. So, we catch a lot of these regressions in place. But then when we go to actually take this thing live, it just goes live, because if it built on our computer and it looked right, it's going to be exactly the same website, because it is deterministic. And I think that's now that I've had it, I don't think I'll ever be able to go to a team that doesn't. Like, it'll be the first thing that I set up in any team that I join, is like, we need to get to the point where merging a PR goes live immediately. Because it's just the confidence and the speed that teams have when they adopt this workflow is really outstanding. And like, we want to get every team to a culture of shipping. You want to be to the point where, like, your team says, yeah, let's just ship that. And if taking something to production, as you said, requires sitting down for 30 minutes and really focusing on going to production, you're probably going to batch your deploys. You're going to, like, wait and kind of wait for a few things to get together, and you're going to try to do that once or twice a week. If you don't have to think about that and you just merge the PR, you go to production literally every time you finish something. And that's the bias toward action, the bias toward getting things out there that we need, so that, we don't have 10,000 line PRs that we have to bisect when something goes wrong. Each PR is 10, 15, 20 lines of code, because we're all just making one fix at a time, and we merge that and get it in. So it has all these cascading benefits of easier QA, easier rollbacks. We can figure out what happened. Every commit is tied to one person, one feature. So if something goes wrong, we know exactly who needs to go check it out to figure out how to get it back up and running. Like, there's so many benefits that come out of this.
Is this the sort of secret win in the Jamstack? I know you Jason have been talking about the sort of Jamstack for a long time, and the sort of benefits and the wins that you can get out of it. But this sort of quality of life upgrade for, I want to say, not just developers, but the entire business. See, Zach just sort of shrugged when he's like, yeah, we just go to production and it's not a big deal. Like, I imagine that people producing the content or the features and, like, doing the other, 90% of the work in the company don't have to worry about, oh, my thing ships in, like, on February 22nd and it will ship in like 2 weeks. Like, they don't, that 10% of, like, brain power, that overhead is just gone.
Yeah.
Does everybody benefit from that?
Absolutely. Because, like, if you think about what this also means, it means that Zach isn't waiting on somebody in QA to have bandwidth to look at the release. Somebody in our ops team isn't like checking a list of QA approved tickets that they have to then go and do release engineering to get out there. Like, we've eliminated this whole cycle that nobody likes. It's physically draining, no matter what your profession is, to have to do release engineering. And, like, the people who do release engineering, I'm sure, would much rather be solving more interesting problems with the rest of our stack. Our back end is super complicated, and there's a lot of stuff that we've got to pay attention to there. And there are things that they want to be doing. If they're getting pulled away from that important work to actually improve the reliability of our systems, to do front end release engineering, like, what a waste of everybody's time. And so, we just, like, short circuit that. Because the front end is so low risk to deploy, get rid of all the approval loops and the gatekeeping, because we don't need it. We don't have those risks of taking that front end live. And if somebody doesn't like it, everyone in our company can log in and roll back a deploy and say, hey, I rolled back this last deploy because I saw a bug. Can we check this?
And it doesn't, I've been at a place where rollback is a monumentous like effort to sort of pull back that I think it was a .NET stack, and it was just like, we eventually started rolling forwards because it was so painful. But we talked earlier about these sort of static folders that just sort of like, because they're deterministic, you can literally just repoint and just be like, there, like it's as it were 5 minutes ago. And then we can sort of look into that.
Yeah. I mean, in our UI, it's a button, right? And I logged in to check just to see. And so far today, it's just about 9 a.m. Pacific time, and we've deployed to production 4 times on our app, like our production app.
That is so awesome.
It is actually deploying as we speak. So somebody just merged something.
That is so. I want people, I want everyone listening to understand that, like, that we're not talking about unicorns and rainbows here and like come join us on the moon. Like, these are tangible things that we can do today. Like, you can go into your garbage stack, my garbage stack, right? I've built stuff that we have complained about and teacup kettle stack these things. You can go in and they can be fixed. You can have this sort of like quality of life improvement, and if you do these sorts of things, I see Fancy Pants taking the marketing site and it deploys so much and the marketing really enjoys it. And that now they want to move the shopping experience over to it. And maybe we bring in Shopify and like, our e-commerce site is probably, an engineering nightmare because it's old, right? We made decisions in the 80s and the 90s. And my grandfather, he didn't even wear, fancy pants, but he thought he was pretty cool, right? But like, you have all these weird things that happen in a business, right? And it's historical paint. But you can take that and move forward. We could add things gently, piece by piece, like Zach was saying, into Shopify. We could have a great mobile experience. We could Instagram our fancy pants site, because that's where all our fancy pants our influencers are, right? You talk about all these things that are happening now and you get really excited and you're like, but I work at Fancy Pants and we're kind of an old school company. Like, you can have these things today. You don't have to work at bleeding edge companies to have this sort of quality life and these awesome things. You can have them now. They're there. They're out there. They're as seen on TV. Go get them now. I'm like excited for people to go try this right now.
Yeah, I feel like the fun thing and maybe the underrated thing that people don't really talk about that much because it's maybe kind of embarrassing, but you can, if you move everything into your build, or if you have as much in your build as possible, you can write some pretty garbage build scripts, and all of that will be shielded from the end user because you're running all of this stuff at build time, and as long as your output is fast, even if your APIs are super slow, even if the data that you're fetching is super slow, as long as you're doing it at build time and not runtime, it's shielded from your customers. So, yeah, it's huge. I love it.
Yeah, that is fantastic. Well, I want to thank you guys for launching Fancy Pants into the next century of wonderful men's and women's apparel and undergarments. It has been. I think we got into a conversation about really sort of like one of the heartstones of Jamstack, and maybe the thing that we don't talk about a lot is this like free time, free overhead, free quality of life back that we can get, not just as developers, but I think as anyone who uses this technology, which is literally everybody, right? Everybody in the company, all the customers, right? The site loads faster, everybody's happy. And it all starts with some early build times and just some thought put into where to put that complexity. I want to give each of you a few minutes to sort of like promote or tout whatever random thing that you have been up to this week. Did you watch The Mandalorian? Are you watching WandaVision? Did you pick up knitting or sculpture in 2020? Like whatever you want to promote, or Zach, have at it. What's new and awesome in your world?
Yeah, I have not been watching WandaVision. I've tried a couple of times to watch WandaVision. I just haven't made it to that second episode yet. I have watched Mandalorian all the way through. I don't know their new episodes. Anyway, I haven't been doing any sort of other stuff. I've been working on 11D nonstop. I'm trying to get 11D so you can run it inside of a Netlify function, and so you can do sort of on-demand builds inside of a Netlify function for CMS previews. So yeah, I've been putting a lot of work into 11D and new 11D release. Just still working towards 1.0. So excited about
fantastic. As someone who just sort of enjoys from the community standpoint, I want to really appreciate your work and your effort and your thoughtfulness into the stack. I said in the beginning, I feel like 11D is a evolution of this sort of static build generator that so many of us have grown up using and iterating on, and new and interesting ways to sort of work with it and give us headspace back to do interesting things and not have to worry about the underpinnings, right? So the primitives are there, and I really appreciate your effort in giving me the space to make awesome things on top of it. So thank you so much.
That's awesome to hear. Thank you.
Absolutely. Jason, what's awesome in your world?
I have been watching WandaVision, and it's awesome. Zach, you got to power through the first 2 episodes because they're super weird.
I'll do it.
Okay. One thing that I am very excited about, I am actually working on a full-blown educational course about everything that we've been talking about today. It's called enterprisejamstack.com. And so I'm working on that with the Egghead team. They're behind like Kent C. Dodds' work, Epic React, and testing JavaScript. Those are Egghead production. So it's going to be a course similar to that. I'm really, really excited about it. I'm about to launch an email course that goes through a lot of the points that we talked about in detail. So if you're interested, definitely get over there and you can subscribe now. But that's the thing that is like I'm really, really excited about. We're doing a bunch of cool stuff in and around the Jamstack in general, and I feel like this is sort of trying to put all that together into a package so that you can take it right to your whole team and everybody can just plug and play with it.
That sounds fantastic. I really look forward to that. I said in the earlier when we started, like your content has been super helpful to me personally with your learning and your openness and your ability to sort of share. Learning with Jason, I think has sort of changed the landscape fundamentally. And this show, this sort of like conversation that we're having now, is based on your willingness to sort of sit out openly and vulnerably and sort of learn and ask and say like, hey, I don't know. And like it really has, you are really someone to look up to. And I really appreciate I know it takes a ton of emotional effort and mental effort to do those things. And I want to thank you. And I'm totally looking forward to your course because those courses are fantastic. I eat them up. So smash and like that subscribe bell. So if I go to jason.af and do subscribe, will I get email updates about it?
I will end up sending an email from my jason.af list, but the actual list for that course is enterprisejamstack.com.
enterprisejamstack.com. All right, everybody head over there and put your name on it. Those courses are amazing. Egghead's done awesome work, and their production value is top notch.
Absolutely.
Thank you both guys for coming on, for walking us through this. Hopefully everyone's got a peek behind the door and realize that, hey, it's just beards and bacon back there. There's nothing special. Everybody's got a chance to pitch in and help out. So this has been Build a Better Architecture with this.labs. Thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, y'all.